Imagine, for a moment, the world as a continuous rush of information. Light, sound, pressure, chemicals, temperature swirling around us in a complex dance. Yet, amid this chaos, humans and other living creatures have evolved intricate biological systems to make sense of it all. From the moment we open our eyes in the morning to the subtle sensation of a breeze against our skin, our lives are shaped and guided by the architecture of the senses. These sensory systems are not merely passive receivers. They are active, sophisticated networks, finely tuned over millennia to detect, transduce, and interpret the signals of the world. The classic image of five senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, remains a powerful framework for understanding perception. With our eyes, we capture the dance of photons reflected off objects. Our ears translate invisible sound waves into the language of music and speech. The skin, our largest organ, is a living tapestry of nerve endings that lets us sense pressure, temperature, and pain. Our tongues distinguish sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, while our noses detect a vast array of chemicals that inform us about food, danger, or even the presence of loved ones. Each of these senses relies on a dedicated organ, a marvel of biological engineering. The eye, with its intricate layers, harnesses photoreceptors to capture light and initiate vision. The ear, through its delicate cochlea and tiny hair cells, transforms vibrations into electrical signals. The skin's mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, nociceptors, and more each play a specialized role, forming a mosaic of tactile information. Taste buds on the tongue and olfactory receptors in the nasal cavity are specialized chemoreceptors that allow us to navigate the world of flavor and scent. But the story of sensory perception extends beyond these five. Scientists have identified additional sensory systems that operate just as powerfully, though often beneath our awareness. The vestibular system, located in the inner ear, is responsible for balance and spatial orientation, helping us stand upright and move with grace. The proprioceptive system, found in muscles, tendons, and joints, provides us with a sense of body position and movement, a kind of internal map that guides even the simplest motion. Interoception, another crucial sensory system, monitors internal states such as hunger, thirst, and visceral sensations, shaping our emotional and physiological well-being. At the core of every sensory system lies the principle of transduction, the conversion of raw environmental stimuli into electrical signals the nervous system can interpret. Specialized nerve cells, called receptors, are the gatekeepers of this process. In the retina of the eye, photoreceptors absorb photons and generate signals that eventually become images. In the cochlea of the ear, mechanoreceptors detect the minute movements of fluid caused by sound waves, triggering a cascade that leads to the perception of sound. Chemoreceptors in the nose and mouth respond to specific molecules, while thermoreceptors and nociceptors in the skin detect temperature changes and potentially damaging stimuli. These receptors are not distributed randomly but are organized into elaborate anatomical structures, sense organs, each adapted to the nature of the stimulus they receive. This organization ensures that each modality, whether it is pressure, light, or chemical, is detected with remarkable precision. For example, the receptive fields of touch receptors in the fingertips are much smaller and more densely packed than those in the back, allowing for fine tactile discrimination where it matters most. Once a stimulus has been transduced into an electrical signal, it travels along specialized neural pathways toward the brain. For most senses, these signals make a crucial stop in the thalamus, a kind of neural relay station, before being sent to dedicated sensory areas in the cortex. The brain then integrates, interprets, and, if necessary, coordinates a response. This journey from sensation to perception is remarkably fast, often occurring in fractions of a second. The distinction between the senses goes even deeper when considering how information is processed. Some senses, like vision and hearing, are considered special senses because their organs are highly localized and their pathways distinct. Others, such as touch, temperature, and pain, are general senses, distributed throughout the body. This division is reflected in the brain, where different regions are dedicated to processing specific types of sensory input. The occipital lobe, for instance, is the primary visual processing center, while areas of the temporal lobe handle auditory information. Across the animal kingdom, the diversity of sensory systems is even more striking. While humans rely on a familiar set of senses, other species have developed astonishing adaptations. Some birds and fish can detect magnetic fields, a sense known as magnetoreception that guides long migrations. Bats and dolphins use echolocation, emitting sounds and interpreting the returning echoes to create detailed maps of their environment. Even within the basic framework of the senses, there are variations. For example, certain animals can detect ultraviolet or infrared light, or sense vibrations at frequencies beyond our range of hearing. Despite their diversity, sensory systems share foundational rules. Sensory transduction is always about converting one form of energy, whether it is light, sound, chemical, or mechanical, into electrical impulses. The specificity of receptor cells ensures that each is tuned to a particular stimulus, reducing confusion between modalities. Neural coding then allows the brain to distinguish not only the type of stimulus but also its intensity and location. Lateral inhibition, a process by which neighboring neurons suppress each other's activity, sharpens perception by enhancing contrast at the edges of sensory fields. The integration of sensory signals is not merely an academic topic, it is central to survival and daily life. Animals, including humans, constantly detect and respond to environmental stimuli, translating sensation into behavior. The skin senses a pinprick and triggers a withdrawal reflex. The ear picks up a sudden noise, and the body readies itself for action. These responses are mediated by the intricate interplay of sensory organs, neural pathways, and effectors, muscles or glands that carry out the appropriate reaction. Understanding the principles of sensory architecture also has practical implications. In fields such as design and architecture, engaging multiple senses can create more immersive and supportive environments. Considering the way light, sound, and touch interact in a space can influence well-being and even sustainability. This holistic approach acknowledges that perception is an interconnected process, shaped by the combined input of all sensory systems. It is important to recognize that while much has been learned about the anatomy and physiology of the senses, there are still areas where scientific understanding is evolving. Although the basic pathways of sensory input are well mapped and the roles of major receptor types are established, the full complexity of how the brain integrates and interprets overlapping signals remains a subject of ongoing investigation. From the first flutter of light on the retina to the subtle sense of balance that allows a dancer to spin, the human body is wired for perception in ways both obvious and mysterious. The architecture of the senses is a testament to biological ingenuity, providing a bridge between the chaos of the environment and the coherent world we experience. As we continue to explore these systems, both in humans and across the rich diversity of animal life, our understanding of perception deepens, revealing not only how we sense the world, but how the world, in turn, shapes who we are. Imagine a single touch, perhaps the gentle brush of fabric against your arm or the sudden prick of a pin. Instantly, your body springs into action, but this response is more than just a reflex or a simple chain reaction. It is the result of a symphony within your nervous system, orchestrated by a complex web of cells and pathways dedicated to transforming a fleeting sensation into conscious perception. At the center of this process are neural pathways, the intricate routes that sensory information follows from specialized receptors in your body, through a relay of neurons, and finally to the regions of your brain where experience is shaped. Every sensation begins with the conversion of an external stimulus into a language the nervous system can interpret. This is the process of signal transduction, a molecular ballet occurring at the interface between the outside world and your nervous system. Consider the cells known as exteroreceptors, interoceptors, and proprioceptors. Each is specialized for a particular domain. Exteroreceptors for external stimuli like touch and temperature, interoceptors for internal states, and proprioceptors for information about body position. When these receptors encounter their specific stimulus, be it a change in temperature, a stretch in muscle, or a chemical signal, they trigger changes in their cell membranes. These changes generate electrical signals, or action potentials, which serve as the currency of the nervous system. These action potentials are far from random. They are carefully encoded representations of the original stimulus. Neural coding is central at this stage. Neurons encode information by varying the frequency and timing of their electrical impulses, much like sending messages in Morse code. Certain aspects of the stimulus, such as intensity or location, are represented by the rate of firing or by which specific neurons are activated. This encoding ensures that by the time the signal leaves the receptor and enters the nerves, it carries a faithful blueprint of the sensory event. From here, the signal's journey becomes a relay, passed along chains of neurons that form the sensory pathways. In the somatosensory system, for example, there is a well-defined organization. The signal travels from the receptor through a sequence of first-order, second-order, and third-order neurons. The first-order neuron has its cell body and a structure called the dorsal root ganglion, just outside the spinal cord. Its long extension, or axon, carries the signal into the central nervous system, where it meets the second-order neuron, often within the spinal cord or lower brainstem. This second neuron sends its own axon upward, crossing to the opposite side of the nervous system, and ultimately reaches the thalamus, a structure deep within the brain that acts as a central relay station. Finally, a third-order neuron carries the signal from the thalamus to the appropriate region of the cerebral cortex, where conscious perception occurs. This three-neuron chain is a general feature of many sensory pathways. Yet the journey is not a simple straight line. Different types of sensory information take different routes. For tactile and proprioceptive information, the dorsal column system serves as the main highway, preserving precise spatial and temporal details. For pain and temperature, the spinothalamic tract is the primary route. Each tract consists of bundles of axons organized in parallel, maintaining the integrity of the encoded message as it ascends. The brain is not a passive recipient of these signals. Once sensory information arrives, neural networks within the cortex spring into action. These networks are composed of billions of neurons, each interconnected with thousands of others, forming layered circuits known as microcircuits and macrocircuits. Within these networks, information is not simply relayed, it is integrated, compared, and interpreted. Synaptic communication, where one neuron sends chemical or electrical signals across the synapse to another, allows for the modification and amplification of signals. Neurotransmitters, the brain's chemical messengers, play a crucial role in this process, influencing how strongly a signal is passed along and even how it is perceived. One of the most remarkable features of sensory processing is the role of feedback. While the term pathway might suggest a one-way street, communication in the brain is often recurrent and bidirectional. Feedback loops between different layers of the cortex and between the cortex and other brain regions such as the thalamus enable the brain to refine its responses. These loops allow for event-related responses, changes in brain activity that are time-locked to a sensory event, and they modulate the frequency and strength of neuronal oscillations, which are patterns of rhythmic electrical activity in the brain. Feedback is also essential for the phenomenon of invariant sensory representations, where the brain maintains a stable perception of an object even as conditions change. Advances in our understanding of neural coding have revealed that sensory neurons do more than simply transmit data. They transform raw input into meaningful patterns by emphasizing certain features and suppressing others, sometimes through positive or negative feedback. In electrosensory systems, for example, feedback pathways can transform incoming signals, enhancing relevant information and filtering out noise. In sensory motor processing, feedback loops are selectively sensitive to reward, suggesting that learning and adaptation are tightly integrated with perception. The integration of sensory signals does not end at the primary sensory cortices. Association areas within the cortex receive converging inputs from multiple sensory modalities, allowing for higher-order processing and the emergence of complex perceptual experiences. Within these networks, the brain can perform pattern completion, filling in gaps in the sensory data to create coherent perceptions even when information is incomplete. Specialized neurons, such as those identified in the visual cortex known as IC encoder cells, are involved in recurrent pattern completion, a process that helps explain visual illusions and the brain's remarkable ability to generate stable perceptions from ambiguous input. Parallel processing streams within the cortex handle different aspects of sensory information simultaneously. For example, in the visual system, some streams focus on processing boundaries and edges, while others analyze surfaces and textures. This division of labor allows the brain to extract multiple layers of meaning from a single sensory event. Top-down feedback. Signals sent from higher-order cortical areas back to earlier sensory areas further shapes perception, enabling attention, expectation, and previous experience to influence what we perceive. Scientists have begun to explore how these network dynamics give rise to perceptual learning. Through repeated exposure and experience, neural circuits can undergo plastic changes, refining their responses and improving perceptual acuity. This plasticity is evident even after a single exposure to a novel stimulus, a phenomenon known as one-shot perceptual learning. Such plasticity is not limited to the early stages of sensory processing but can involve high-level cortical regions, underscoring the brain's capacity to adapt and optimize its perceptual machinery. The science of sensory input and control, then, is not merely about the transmission of signals, but about the emergence of perception from the collective activity of neural networks. Each sensation results from a multi-layered dialogue between the outside world and the nervous system, between raw input and internal models, between bottom-up data and top-down expectations. As researchers unravel the details of these pathways, they uncover not only how we perceive the world, but how our brains construct the very reality we experience. The story of sensation is, at its heart, a story of transformation, a journey from signal to perception, carried out by networks so intricate that they continue to challenge and inspire scientific discovery. Imagine walking down a city street at dusk. The world buzzes with sensory input, headlights flicker at the edge of your vision, distant voices echo, the scent of rain rises from the pavement, your foot brushes an uneven curb, yet your mind does not drown in this chaos. Instead, you notice the sound of a friend calling your name, the flash of a bike whizzing by, the subtle shift in pavement texture beneath your step. What you sense and what you ignore is not accidental. The brain's most remarkable trick is not simply to receive sensory information, but to sculpt it, filtering, amplifying, muting, and weaving together the tapestry of experience. This invisible choreography underlies everything from focusing on a single voice in a crowd to tuning out the hum of a refrigerator after a few minutes. Here, in the realm of control and modulation, perception becomes uniquely ours. The brain is no passive receiver. From the moment sensory data arrives, it is subject to a hierarchy of filters and switches, some set at the level of the senses themselves, others deep within the brain's circuitry. Many of these mechanisms work automatically, beneath the surface of consciousness, while others respond to our shifting attention and goals. The distinction between what we consciously notice and what our brain processes in the background defines our sensory life. Research on sensory processing shows that the brain routinely sifts through torrents of incoming data, selecting what is most relevant and relegating the rest to the unconscious. For example, while walking, the gentle pressure of your shoes against your feet is processed, but unless something changes, like a pebble working its way inside, you are unlikely to notice it. This filtering begins at the periphery, where sensory organs themselves can dampen or amplify signals. But much of the heavy lifting happens centrally, where neural circuits in the brainstem, thalamus, and cortex decide what gets through. One of the most sophisticated of these filters is the thalamic reticular nucleus. As the brain matures, especially after adolescence, this structure sharpens its ability to inhibit unnecessary sensory data, allowing adults to process information with greater precision and less distraction. This refinement, however, is not absolute. It can be compromised in certain neuropsychiatric conditions, resulting in either overwhelming sensitivity or a dulled perceptual world. At the heart of this process lies attention. Attention acts as a spotlight, illuminating select features of the environment while leaving others in shadow. Neural imaging studies reveal that when we focus on a particular sense, say, listening intently to music, specific brain regions ramp up their activity, enhancing the processing of relevant information. This is known as top-down attentional control, where signals from higher-order brain areas, such as the prefrontal and parietal cortices, descend to modulate sensory regions. The effect is much like wearing noise-canceling headphones. The brain actively suppresses irrelevant background input, making the chosen stimulus stand out in sharp relief. But attention is only one tool in the brain's arsenal. Sensory adaptation provides another, subtler means of tuning perception. If you have ever entered a room with a strong odor, you will notice that the scent quickly fades, even if the source remains. This is sensory adaptation at work, the nervous system's way of recalibrating its sensitivity to persistent stimuli. Adaptation is not limited to smell, it occurs across all senses. The eyes adjust to bright sunlight, the ears become less sensitive to ongoing hums, and the skin stops noticing the pressure of a wristwatch. This process ensures that sudden changes in the environment, which may signal danger or opportunity, are highlighted against a muted background. While adaptation is a bottom-up process driven by the raw properties of the stimulus itself, attention is a top-down mechanism, guided by goals, expectations, and prior knowledge. These two forces can operate independently. Research shows that adaptation can alter perception even when attention is focused elsewhere. For example, after staring at a moving pattern, the world may appear to drift in the opposite direction for a moment, regardless of where your attention was during the exposure. Conversely, you can pay attention to a stimulus without experiencing adaptation, as in the case of a constant but ignored background noise. The distinction between top-down and bottom-up control is central to understanding how the brain shapes what we sense. Bottom-up processing is fundamentally data-driven. It begins with sensory input and builds up to perception. Top-down processing, in contrast, is knowledge-driven. It uses expectations, memories, and goals to interpret and sometimes even predict incoming data. These strategies are not mutually exclusive. Recent studies challenge this strict dichotomy, suggesting that the brain creates integrated priority maps where both sensory features and cognitive factors compete for prominence. Whether you notice a flash of color or the sound of your name depends on this dynamic interplay, an ongoing negotiation between the world as it is and the world as you expect it to be. Predictive filtering, a powerful form of top-down control, illustrates this well. The orbital frontal cortex, a region at the front of the brain, helps form predictions about what sensory events are likely to happen next. When you sit in a familiar cafe, your brain anticipates the clatter of cups and the aroma of coffee. If something unexpected occurs, a sudden crash or an acrid smell, your perception sharpens in response. This mechanism is not only essential for efficient perception, but also plays a role in disorders where prediction and filtering break down, such as certain forms of schizophrenia or sensory modulation disorder. Feedback loops are another core principle in the brain's regulation of sensory input. Unlike a simple feed-forward relay, where information flows in one direction from receptor to cortex, sensory systems are laced with recurrent circuits. Signals from higher brain areas loop back to earlier processing stages, selectively amplifying or suppressing signals based on context and behavioral relevance. These loops allow for rapid adjustment, ensuring that perception remains flexible and responsive to changing needs. In some cases, feedback even helps generate invariant representations, stable perceptions that persist despite changing circumstances, such as recognizing a friend's face in different lighting. The integration of sensory systems is also vital. Senses rarely operate in isolation. Crosstalk between sensory modalities allows the brain to assemble a more complete picture of the world. This is evident in multisensory experiences, such as the way the sight of a lemon can make your mouth water before you taste it, or in conditions like synesthesia, where stimulation in one sense triggers involuntary experiences in another. Such integration is refined through feedback and modulation, enabling the brain to reconcile conflicting information and prioritize the most salient features. Sensory modulation is not merely a neurophysiological process, it has profound implications for behavior and well-being. The ability to regulate sensory input, to seek, avoid, or tolerate certain sensations, affects everything from emotional stability to social functioning. When these regulatory mechanisms go awry, as in sensory modulation disorder, individuals may experience hypersensitivity to pain or be overwhelmed by everyday sensations. This altered processing can contribute to challenges in mental health, highlighting the deep connections between sensory systems and emotional regulation. Research also points to the role of sensory input in neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to experience. Sensory stimulation can drive plastic changes, sharpening perceptual skills and supporting adaptation throughout life. This is not limited to childhood. Adults, too, can benefit from targeted sensory interventions designed to enhance or recalibrate perceptual processing, with implications for therapy and rehabilitation. Ultimately, what we sense is not a direct reflection of the world, but the result of a dynamic, ever-shifting process of selection, interpretation, and adjustment. The brain's talent for filtering, prioritizing, and modulating sensory input allows us to navigate a complex and unpredictable environment with remarkable efficiency. In every moment, our perception is shaped by a delicate balance between the signals that reach us and the mechanisms that decide which of them matter. This balance is what makes perception not only possible, but deeply personal, a unique window onto the world sculpted by biology, experience, and intention. Imagine a world where the input from your senses, the sounds, sights, textures, and tastes, is scrambled, dulled, or magnified beyond comfort. For many, this is not the plot of a science fiction story, but a daily reality. Perception, that seamless tapestry woven from sensory threads, can become frayed or tangled when the systems that process input go awry. Studying these disruptions reveals as much about the resilience and plasticity of the brain as it does about the vulnerabilities that make each perceptual world unique. Throughout history, scientists and physicians have explored the territory of sensory and nervous system disorders, often by comparing how perception can deteriorate or diverge across species and individuals. Early comparative studies highlighted the surprising variability in how different animals sense and interpret their environments. This diversity, known as the Umwelt, reminds us that every organism lives in its own subjective perceptual space. Even among humans, the boundaries of this space are not fixed. Some people can distinguish subtle hues that others miss, while some cannot recognize faces or objects despite perfect eyesight. Mapping these perceptual spaces has become a scientific frontier, revealing both the extraordinary adaptability and the inherent fragility of our sensory systems. Perceptual disorders take many forms, affecting every sense and every stage of processing. Some are rooted in the brain's inability to organize or interpret sensory input, while others arise from disruptions in the way signals are relayed from the periphery to the cortex. Clinical observations have documented cases where individuals lose the sense of their own bodies, unable to locate a limb in space or recognize their reflection in a mirror. These disturbances of body scheme and spatial perception can profoundly alter one's experience of self and environment. Visual discrimination disorders make it difficult to distinguish shapes or colors, while agnosias sever the link between perception and recognition, leaving a person able to see but unable to identify familiar objects. In apraxia, the brain struggles to plan and execute movements, even when strength and coordination remain intact. The clinical presentation of sensory perceptual alterations is complex, often intertwined with behavioral and psychological consequences. People may withdraw from social situations, develop anxiety, or struggle with everyday tasks. The brain mechanisms underlying these disturbances are the subject of ongoing research, with evidence pointing to disruptions in sensory integration networks and feedback loops. The International Classification of Diseases recognizes a broad spectrum of perceptual disturbances, ranging from transient distortions to persistent deficits, affecting vision, hearing, touch, and even the sense of body position. Prevalence varies, but the impact on daily life can be profound, shaping not just perception but mood, cognition, and social engagement. Perceptual deficits are not limited to rare neurological conditions. They can appear as learning disorders, where the brain's ability to process and interpret input is compromised. For some, this means difficulty distinguishing speech sounds, leading to challenges in reading and language acquisition. For others, it involves problems with spatial awareness or motor planning, making tasks like writing or catching a ball unusually difficult. The common thread is a disruption in the way sensory information is received, filtered, or integrated, an interruption in the conversation between the world and the brain. One of the most striking ways perception can falter is through the experience of hallucinations, perceptions that occur in the absence of external stimuli. Hallucinations can involve any sensory modality: hearing voices when no one is speaking, seeing shapes or lights that do not exist, feeling phantom touches, detecting smells or tastes that are not present, or even sensing that one's body is moving or positioned differently than it actually is. These phenomena are clinically significant, often associated with psychiatric conditions such as psychosis, but they can also arise from neurological disorders, sensory deprivation, or substance use. The causes are diverse, reflecting the intricate balance required to generate a coherent perceptual world. The brain's predictive machinery, usually so adept at filling in gaps and resolving ambiguity, sometimes overreaches, generating perceptions out of thin air. Not all perceptual disturbances are as dramatic as hallucinations. Sensory processing disorder, or SPD, is a condition in which the brain has difficulty responding appropriately to sensory input. This can take several forms. Some individuals are over-responsive, finding ordinary sensations overwhelming or even painful. Others are under-responsive, failing to notice stimuli that would attract most people's attention. Still others crave intense sensory experiences, seeking out movement, sound, or tactile input. There are also discrimination disorders where the challenge lies in distinguishing between similar sensations. SPD is particularly common in children, but can persist or emerge later in life, sometimes in association with other developmental or psychiatric conditions. Diagnosis involves careful observation and assessment, as symptoms can overlap with those of anxiety, autism, or attention disorders. The causes of SPD are not fully understood, but research points to both genetic and environmental factors, as well as differences in the way sensory signals are processed and integrated within the brain. Interventions often focus on sensory integration therapy, designed to help individuals better organize and respond to sensory information. This might involve structured play, exposure to different textures, sounds, or movements, and exercises that promote self-regulation. While not a cure, such therapies can improve functioning and quality of life, particularly when tailored to the individual's specific sensory profile. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, offers a vivid illustration of the interplay between sensory processing and neuroplasticity. Many people with ASD experience atypical sensory responses: hypersensitivity to sounds, aversion to certain textures, or an unusual fascination with visual patterns. Recent research has identified neural anatomical and neurotransmitter differences in the brains of individuals with ASD, contributing to impaired sensory integration. These findings have driven the development of neuroplasticity-based interventions, which seek to harness the brain's capacity to rewire itself in response to experience. Therapies may target specific sensory modalities or aim to improve the coordination between sensory and motor systems, supporting more adaptive responses to the environment. The concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize, has transformed the landscape of sensory rehabilitation. After injury, stroke, or sensory loss, the brain can recruit new pathways and strengthen existing ones to compensate for deficits. Adaptive plasticity can restore lost function, while maladaptive plasticity may reinforce unhelpful patterns, such as chronic pain or persistent phantom sensations. Rehabilitation strategies increasingly leverage this plasticity, using targeted exercises, technological aids, and even direct stimulation of neural networks to promote recovery. In some cases, sensory function can be restored to near normal levels, particularly when interventions are begun early and tailored to the individual's needs. Technological advances have opened new frontiers in neurorehabilitation, allowing clinicians to modulate sensory networks with unprecedented precision. Techniques such as virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, and non-invasive brain stimulation offer promising avenues for restoring or enhancing sensory function. These approaches are grounded in the understanding that perception is not static, but a dynamic process shaped by both biology and experience. By perturbing neural networks in targeted ways, it is possible to encourage beneficial forms of plasticity and mitigate the effects of sensory deficits. Current research also explores the therapeutic potential of neuroplasticity for cognitive enhancement, not just recovery. By leveraging the brain's capacity for change, it may be possible to sharpen perceptual skills, improve attention, and support learning across the lifespan. This is a rapidly evolving field, with ongoing studies examining which interventions are most effective, which brain networks are most responsive, and how individual differences shape outcomes. The study of perception's failures, its disorders, deficits, and illusions has deepened our appreciation for the intricate choreography of sensory processing. It has revealed how the brain constructs not just a window onto reality, but a world uniquely tailored to each individual, shaped by biology, experience, and adaptation. As our understanding of neuroplasticity grows, so too does the promise of sensory rehabilitation and enhancement, offering hope to those whose perceptual worlds have been disrupted, and a deeper understanding to all who seek to comprehend the mysteries of the mind.